discuss the birth of Rasulullah and the incident of So today I wanted to mention the Shama'il of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Shama'il are the physical attributes of an individual, right? And this is so unique that there is perhaps no one in history who has been recorded so carefully as Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? That the Sahaba recorded every single little detail that they could remember about Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. To the point that we have reports mentioning how many white hairs Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had. Right? Such detail, so much detail about an individual we never find a mention about any other individual in history. And not only his public life, but also his private life, his marital life, his life inside the home. Every single detail is made public. And this is such a blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because this allows us to know how to live. Right? Everyone has their private home life, the life that they live with their wife, their children, especially their wife in the bedroom, behind closed doors. This is such a private aspect of your life that no one finds out about, that you don't discuss with anyone. Yet Rasulullah's life is public. Right? His wives speak about, and this you're not even allowed to speak about that life to anyone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala curses those people who spend time with their wife and then go talk about it outside. Right? Or the wife who spends time with her husband and then speaks about it to her friends. Allah curses those people. But the one exception is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because in the example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find a perfect example for us to emulate. Right? A perfect human being of perfect character. That this is the most pure, perfect lifestyle that anyone can live. If you emulate it, then you will find happiness and success, and you'll be able to live a peaceful life. Therefore, every single aspect of Rasulullah's life is made public. And every detail that you can imagine is recorded. However, most of that detail comes in the Medinan life. Right? The part after Hijrah, after he made Hijrah. This obviously makes sense because in Mecca, the Muslims, they're just trying to survive. They're in survival mode. They're being tortured. They're literally trying to survive. And when you're just trying to survive, you don't have time to notice and record all the small details. Right? Once they move to Medina, now they're a state, there's more safety, and therefore the Sahaba are able to dedicate more time to just observing Rasulullah and recording it. And it's the mercy of Allah again that most of the ahkam also come down in Medina. Right? So we don't miss out on anything in Islam. No one can make a claim that, because the life of Mecca was not recorded in such detail, we missed out in the things that we need for our survival, for our success in the akhirah. No one can say that. Why? Because the core tenets that were taught in Mecca, we have those recorded in the Quran, in the Sunnah, whatever we have, and most of the rules and rulings in Islam itself came down in Medina, which is very heavily and thoroughly recorded. Right? But this is the chapter of Shama'il. What do you guys think? Do you think we should go into Shama'il today and then just touch over it next week for whoever missed out, or do you think we should do some other topic?
No, Shama'il, just talk. We can just review it next week.
Go into it and review it next week?
Yeah.
Okay, inshallah. Bismillah. So now, the Shama'il of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The one thing to keep in mind is that every single prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends them down as the pinnacle of beauty according to his people. Right? Wherever a prophet is sent down, his language is the most eloquent of all his people. In his form, he is the most beautiful of all people in his locality, the most well-built. The prophets are the height of perfection. The prophets have no flaws, physical, intellectual, or any other way, spiritual. Right? The prophets are perfect. That's why they say that Musa had a stutter. That he said that, he has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, send my brother as a prophet. Many ulama say that this is not a correct understanding to have. Musa did not have a stutter. Musa just wanted the aid of his brother because Musa was someone had a very strict personality. He was very straightforward. And he wanted his brother to accompany him so that he could be more kind to the Bani Israel, more caring and loving, whereas Musa would take the role of someone who was strict and kept them in check. Right? But it's incorrect to assume that Musa alayhi salam had a problem speaking. Right? Because this is against the attributes of a prophet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends the prophets in the most beautiful, perfect of forms. And obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the most beautiful of all, the most beautiful man ever created. His voice was the most beautiful of voices. His looks were the most beautiful of looks. His character was the most beautiful of characters. Everything about Rasulullah was perfect and beautiful. To the point that his sweat smelled like musk. Right? Nothing. There was no deficiency in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Yusuf alayhi salam was beautiful, but our Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam was even far more beautiful than Yusuf alayhi salam. Right? So what we have to keep in mind is that when the Sahaba they described Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, although some of the descriptions might be looked at as negative in our context, we have to understand them in a positive light and understand the positive meaning behind that. Because obviously the Sahaba, they give this forewarning all the time that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the most beautiful. مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ. He's such a person that no one has ever seen, no one has ever heard of. Just the most absolute, perfect, beautiful human being. They say that he's more beautiful than the moon. One Sahabi says that I looked at the moon on the 14th night, full moon, beautiful, radiant. And I looked at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and I kept looking back and forth, trying to decide which one is more beautiful. And I came to the conclusion that the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is more beautiful than the moon. Right? So we have to understand everything in this positive context, because this is what the Sahaba are trying to describe, the perfection of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And obviously the narrations that we find about the description of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are obviously not the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself. This is the Sahaba describing Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So inshallah we'll go through some narrations which come in Ash-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya of Imam Tirmidhi. Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, who compiled Sunan al-Tirmidhi, he compiled a separate booklet which he appendixed into his Sunan work, which is called Ash-Shama'il al-Muhammadiyya, right, which discusses the physical attributes of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right, so first of all we have here Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وبسند المتصل منا إلى الإمام الترمذي رحمه الله اللهم انفعنا بعلومه وعلومهم آمين يا رب العالمين أنه قال أخبرنا أبو رجاء قتيبة بن سعيد قال عن مالك بن أنس عن ربيعة بن أبي عبد الرحمن عن أنس بن مالك رضي الله عنه أنه قال سمعه يقول كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ليس بالطويل البائن ولا بالقصير ولا بالأبيض الأمهق ولا بالآدم ولا بالجعد القطط ولا بالسبت بعثه الله تعالى على رأس 40 سنة فأقام بمكة 10 سنين وبالمدينة 10 سنين وتوفاه الله على رأس 60 سنة وليس في رأسه ولحيته 20 شعرة بيضاء. So this is the report of Anas radiallahu anhu that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was ليس بالطويل البائن. He was not extremely tall, nor was he short. ولا بالأبيض الأمهق, nor was he so white that it was pale. Right? He was not pure, absolutely white. ولا بالآدم, nor was he dark brown or dark in complexion. Rather, Rasulullah's complexion was such that he was a fair complexion, and as we'll see in reports that come forward, he had a hue of redness to his face. Right, so he was a fair complexion, and especially when he went out in the sun or he was outside, he was active, then it would become hued with a redness. وَلَا بِالْجَعْدِ الْقَطَرِ, nor was his hair extremely curly. It was curls. وَلَا بِالصَّبْتِ, nor was it perfectly straight. Rather, Rasulullah's hair was wavy. بعثه الله تعالى على رأس 40 سنة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him at, يعني بعث means not sent as in making a prophet. Making a prophet at 40 years old, when he was 40. فأقام مكة 10 سنين وبالمدينة 10 سنين. He stayed in Mecca for 10 years and Medina for 10 years. However, most of the reports mention 13 years in Mecca and 10 years in Medina, which is the most correct view. And وتوفاه الله على رأس 60 سنة. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took him away when he was 60 years old. Again, most reports say 63, which is the most correct view. وليس في رأسه ولحيته 20 شعرة بيضاء, and his head and beard did not have more than 20 white hairs. Right? Even at the age of 63 when he passed away, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And in fact, we'll see that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Shayyabatni Hud." The surah, Rasulullah didn't have any white hair at all. And then the Sahabas noticed one day that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a few white hairs, 10, 15 white hairs in his head. And they said, "Ya Rasulullah, you have white hairs." So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Shayyabatni Hud." The surah Hud that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down, it's made me old. Because such a strict, severe surah, it was so hard on me to hear this. Because this is surah is talking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala destroyed the different ummahs. And Rasulullah became so grieved and concerned that perhaps Allah will destroy my ummah as well. He said that this stress and worry has made me old. So Shayyabatni Hud. But other than that, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not have any white hairs. Very, very few. That you could literally count the white hairs that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had. Even though, again, he passed away at the age of 63. Right? 63 years old. And again, keep in mind that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his late 50s, because Medina, he came to Medina in the last 10 years of his life, correct? 53 years he lived in Mecca. When he did Hijrah, he was 53, 54 years old. That means all these battles that happened, they happened Rasulullah when he's in his late 50s. And in his late 50s, he's described, Sahaba, what did they say? That Rasulullah was the most brave of people. Right? In Hunayn, when Rasulullah is 60 years old, or 60 to 61 years old, in Hunayn, when the Sahaba are ambushed, and all hell breaks loose, it's complete chaos, so many people turn and run away because of the chaos. The few people, who is the one who stands out front without wavering, taking a step back? Right? Again, and some Sahaba would say that sometimes if we are afraid in battle, we'd go and stand behind Rasulullah because Rasulullah is the greatest of all. And this is in his late 50s. Right? He conquered Mecca, became a conqueror of Mecca in his early 60s. Right? 2 years before he passed away. So we see that Rasulullah was actually very, very healthy throughout his entire life, very strong. We'll see that now in this report, inshallah. وبه قال حدثنا أحمد بن عبده الضبي البصري وعلي بن حجر وأبو جعفر محمد بن الحسين وهو ابن أبي حليمة والمعنى واحد. قالوا حدثنا عيسى بن يونس عن عمر بن عبد الله مولى غفرة قال حدثني إبراهيم بن محمد من ولد علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه. يعني إبراهيم بن محمد اسمه ولده يعني شلنا علي رضي الله عنه. قال كان علي إذا وصف رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالطويل المماغط. Now this is the grandson or the son of Ali radiallahu anhu narrating the report of Ali radiallahu anhu. He's saying that when Ali radiallahu anhu would describe Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to us, again, who is Ali radiallahu anhu?
His cousin.
His cousin. But what's unique about Ali radiallahu anhu? His son-in-law as well. And basically, Rasulullah raised Ali radiallahu anhu from a very young age. And because Abu Talib raised Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Abu Talib was not very wealthy. They were actually they lived a life of financial difficulty. Right? Things were tight. So when Rasulullah got older, married Khadija radiallahu anha, she was a very wealthy businesswoman. Obviously, money was no longer an issue for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he sallallahu alaihi wasallam adopted one of the sons of Abu Talib to make it easier for Abu Talib and his children. Right? So Abbas radiallahu anhu took in Ja'far and raised Ja'far radiallahu anhu as his own son, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam took in Ali radiallahu anhu. Right? So when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was 40 years old, Ali radiallahu anhu was only like 6, 7, maybe up to 10, between 6 and 10 years old. He was significantly younger than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in his 30s, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam adopted Ali radiallahu anhu, and Ali radiallahu anhu lived with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as his son, basically. Right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam actually raised Ali radiallahu anhu. So Ali radiallahu anhu was obviously extremely close to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? Not only is he his cousin, not only is he his son-in-law, but he actually raised him as a son. He grew up in the household of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he described Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, لم يكن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بالطويل الممغط. Again, he says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not extremely tall, right? So tall that you have to look up to speak to him. He was not very extremely tall. ولا بالقصير متردد. No, was he extremely short. Mutaraddid means so short that it seems like one part of it is going into another part, folding in on itself. Right? So it's a hyperbole of the the quality of being short. So if he's not very tall, nor is he very short. He's a medium stature. وَكَانَ رَبْعَةً مِنَ الْقَوْمِ. He was of average height amongst his people. And many other narrations, they say that rather he was slightly taller than the average. Right? So everyone's about 6 feet tall, so it's only 6'1", 6'2", like that. And other narrations mentioned one of the miracles of Rasulullah ﷺ was that if he walked between two tall men, it would not seem as if they were taller than Rasulullah ﷺ. However, if they separated and you looked at Rasulullah ﷺ himself, you would describe him as being of average height. You would not describe him being very tall. Right? And we see this is the beauty that Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned that the best of everything is placed in the middle path. Right? إِنَّا جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. We made you the middle ummah, middle nation. Everything is in the middle. Middle is the best. You don't want to have ifrat nor tafreed. You don't want to have too much of either way. So everything about Rasulullah ﷺ is also very proportionate in the middle. It's not too tall, not too short. Not too soft in nature that he's being pushed over, nor is he too strict that he turns people away. Everything is in between, balanced, perfect. Right? So in his height as well, he was balanced, not too tall, not too short. But if he walked with anyone, they would not seem taller than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Again, his hair was not extremely curly, ولا بالصبت. It was nor was it straight. وكان جعدا رجلا. Rather, it was naturally wavy. Right? It wasn't straight, it was wavy. ولم يكن بالمطهم. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his face and his body was not bloated or big. Right? He was not fat. ولا بالمكلثم. And his face was not completely circular. However, وَكَانَ فِي وَجْهِهِ تَدْوِيرٌ. However, his face had some roundness to it. And he had like an oval-shaped face. Right? أَبْيَضُ مُشْرَبٌ. He was fair-skinned. Mushrab, again, he was imbued with some redness. His skin tone was imbued with some redness. أَدْعَجُ الْعَيْنَيْنِ. Ad'aj means extremely black. Right? He had extremely black eyes. What ad'aj means is that the iris, right, was extremely dark. No one has black eyes. People can have very dark brown, extremely dark brown, but no, people don't have black eyes. Rasulullah's eyes were black, right, pure black. And ad'aj means that the iris part of his eye was extremely dark black, and the whiteness around it was extremely white. Right, the contrast was extremely sharp. Right? And it's a very, very beautiful quality that some people have a hint of, but no one can have how Rasulullah had it. Ahdabul ashfar. His eyelashes were long. Jalilul mushash. He had thick joints. Right? His joints, finger joints, wrists, right? All of his joints were thick. Now what does this mean? Thick means it's very strong. And Rasulullah's hands were heavy hands. Right? It wasn't something that if you shook it, it would feel firm and strong. It was not weak. Right? So when people have very small joints, you appear fragile. Right? But when you have thick, large joints, it gives the appearance of strength. And Rasulullah, not only did he have an appearance of strength, he actually was extremely strong. Can anyone think of a story that shows us how strong Rasulullah was?
He had somebody challenged with the wrestling.
Yeah, that's one.
It was one of those guys, very big, and
yeah, Rasulullah defeated a star wrestler that had never been defeated in his life. Any other story?
Did he need more strength to push that the stone in the corner? He did it. The 4 people lifted it, but he's the one lifted and put it in the corner.
So that is not necessarily strength. That was more so done for to settle a matter. Everyone was fighting over who puts it in. So yeah, no, I definitely that's I like the way you're thinking, mashallah.
Battle of Khandaq.
Exactly. Battle of Khandaq. What happened? There's a big boulder that comes. Again, if you guys go to Medina, we'll get to Khandaq one day, inshallah. But it's such a miracle, Khandaq itself. But anyways, as the Sahaba were digging, Medina is not sand, right? It's not just sandy. It's very rocky. The terrain is very, very rocky, mountainous, and even if you're trying to dig, it's just boulders. Till now, they have modern machinery and they still struggle to dig underpasses and this and that. Takes them a year, 2 years sometimes. Right now, they're digging this trench by hand, right, with pickaxes. So they get to this boulder that no one is able to break. The Sahaba are trying, but no one is able to break it. So finally they give up, it's not breaking, they go to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam descends into the trench himself, and he strikes the boulder 3 times, and it shatters to pieces. Right? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam not only had the appearance of strength, he actually was extremely, extremely strong. Right? Very, very strong personality. And Allah, he says also that al-mu'minu al-qawiyyu khayrun min al-mu'min al-da'if wa fi kulli khayr. Rasulullah said a strong believer is better than a weak believer. However, there's goodness in both of them.
Battle of Hunain, when everybody ran away, they stood firm.
Yeah, exactly. We discussed that earlier as well, right? That's with regards to the bravery of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, being strong and fit, this is a very praiseworthy quality that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes. Allah likes beauty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes perfection. So it's unfortunately it's bad that we have such sedentary lifestyles and we become overweight and weak. You know, we have back pains and knee pains from a young age. It's not good. It's very, very important that we actually, work out, take care of ourselves, be healthy, train, be fit, active, live healthy lifestyles. This is an important part of Islam as well that is often neglected, unfortunately.
Does Allah encourage that?
He did. He definitely encouraged that. Now, where were we? Jalil al-Mushash wal-Katid. And his shoulders were also very broad and big. Ajrad. He did not have much hair. He wasn't very hairy. Zu Nasrubah. The hair on his noble body, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was that he had a thin line of hair that ran from his chest down to his navel. A thin line. Everywhere else, his abdomen, his chest didn't have any other hair. However, he did have hair on his arms. So from his shoulders to his arms, he had hair, and on his stomach, he had a thin line of hair that ran from his chest to his navel. However, the rest of his chest, the rest of his abdomen, did not have any hair. Shashnul Kafain, he had full, sturdy, fleshy hands. Wal Qadamain, and feet. Right? Full, strong hands and feet. إِذَا مَشَى تَقَلَّعَ كَأَنَّمَا يَنْحَطُ مِنْ صَدَرٍ. When he would walk, he would lift his feet. Right? He would not drag his feet when he walked, he would lift. And it's as if, when he was walking, it was as if he was walking down from a high place. You know when you're walking down a hill, you walk fast? You have to lift your feet. You can't drag your feet when you're walking down a hill. Right? So imagine walking down a hill, that's how Ali was saying, that's how Rasulullah always walked. And the Sahaba say that Rasulullah would walk so fast that we would struggle to keep up with him. However, he'd be walking, at a normal pace, not overburdening himself. However, his pace was so quick that the Sahaba would struggle to keep up and they would get tired trying to keep up with Rasulullah.
It was consistent, right?
Sorry?
It was consistent.
Yeah, exactly. And that shows an important character of Rasulullah, that he kept himself busy. He had purpose to everything he did. He also walked with purpose, right? Walked as if he had to go somewhere, because he did have to go somewhere. It's not nice when you see someone walking lazily, dragging their feet, walking slow. It's not a nice sight to behold. Right? Rasulullah carried himself with a lot of dignity, a lot of waqar. He carried himself as if he was an important person, as if he had meaning. And that's expected. Right? Although he had humility, Rasulullah was the most humble of people. But at the same time, he carried himself with self-respect and dignity. Right? It's important, very important, again, not only to be healthy, but also appear nice, look nice, smell nice, carry yourself with self-respect. This is an important, very, very important aspect of Islam. Right? That we have to take care of ourselves in that way and present ourselves in that way. If we don't have self-respect, then no one will respect us. Right? Being Muslim, being a good Muslim, being a wali doesn't mean that you're some masoom person that just gets stepped around by everyone, that you're some bichara sitting in the corner. That's not what it means to be a good Muslim. That's not what it means to be a wali of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A wali, someone who's close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also carries himself with that dignity and self-respect. Right? But you do not think of yourself as being better than anyone else. Right? That's what humility means. You don't look down on anyone. You don't absolve yourself from faults that other people have. You have an understanding that even a kafir, you have an understanding that perhaps this kafir might die as a Muslim, and Allah might snatch the blessing of Iman away from me. So when it's all said and done, that person also might be better than me. So we have this understanding that perhaps everyone is better than me. And that's why we treat everyone with respect. But at the same time, we do not humiliate ourselves. We also carry ourselves with self-respect as well. Because after all, our body is also a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just like the other creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands respect, this creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also demands respect and care. Right? Our body is also a creation of Allah, a gift of Allah. And just like we have to respect other creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to respect this creation of Allah that He gifted us, which is our body. So again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam walked with purpose. He picked up his feet when he walked. وَإِذَا الْتَفَتَ الْتَفَتَ مَعًا. When he would turn around to speak to someone, he would turn around completely. He wouldn't just look, if someone called him, he wouldn't just look like this. He would rather turn his entire body and give that person his full attention. بَيْنَ كَتِفَيْهِ خَاتَمٌ. Between his two shoulders, there was the seal of the prophethood. وَهُوَ خَاتَمُ النَّبِيِّينَ. And this khatam, the seal, was the seal of prophethood. أَجْوَدَ النَّاسِ صَدْرًا. He was the most generous of people. وَأَصْدَقَ النَّاسِ لَهْجَةً. He was the most truthful of people in his speech. وَأَلْيَنُهُمْ عَلِيكَةً. And the most soft and kind of them in his nature. وَأَكْرَمُهُمْ عِشْرَةً. He was the most noble of them in his social interaction. مَنْ رَآهُ بَدِيهَةً هَابَهُ. If anyone were to see Rasulullah suddenly, or if they were to meet Rasulullah initially for the first time, without getting to know Rasulullah, they would be in fear, they would be awe of Rasulullah, because his personality had this awe about him. And وَمَنْ خَالَطَهُ مَعْرِفَةً أَحَبَّهُ. And whoever got to know him, they would fall in love with Rasulullah. يَقُولُ نَاعِتُهُ. Anyone who's trying to describe Rasulullah would say, لَمْ أَرَ قَبْلَهُ وَلَا بَعْدَهُ مِثْلَهُ. I have never seen anyone like him before him or nor after him. And this is the description of Rasulullah. I want to go over a few more narrations, but inshallah we'll leave that for next week. That way, we'll continue with this and we'll add on next week, inshallah. SubhanAllah wa bihamdihi, subhanakallah. If you have any questions, you can ask now before we end off.
Can you there's a description of the seal on his, what his shape was it?
There is. We'll get into that next week, inshallah. I want to do that this week, but we'll leave it for next week, inshallah. Yes.
So the hadiths that are collected in Shama'il, actually, how are they classified? They are classified as Sahih because you said they're not really coming out of Rasulullah's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So how are they classified?
A hadith is not restricted to the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The af'al of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the taqdirat of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all those are considered ahadith. Right? Those exist in Sahih Bukhari as well, they exist in Sahih Muslim as well. Because again, every aspect of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is sunnah. Right? So now obviously his taqdirat and his af'al will not be the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? That's not possible. So just because something is not the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not classify it as weak. Now, as for Shama'il al-Tirmidhi, the entire Sunan, the purpose, if you look at the title of Shama'il al-Tirmidhi, the objective of Imam al-Tirmidhi is not to bring only Sahih narrations. And this is a very, very important thing that we have to keep in mind. I want to address this, inshallah, before we continue further. That there is, unfortunately, this misconception out there that only Sahih hadith can be accepted and Da'if hadith cannot be accepted. Right? This understanding of hadith is a very rudimentary level of understanding and is very, very flawed. Right? Although it might seem nice because we're translating Sahih and Da'if in our context. But remember, Sahih and Da'if, this is not a word that can be translated. This is a jargon, this is terminology. So if you translate Sahih, what does Sahih mean? Right. No, wrong. That's not what Sahih means. Sahih does not mean right. Correct. That's the translation of the word Sahih. When we say Sahih for Hadith, it does not mean right. It doesn't mean strong either.
The chain of narration is mutawatir.
That's one part of what Sahih means. Right? Sahih means you have to have 5 conditions. Right? Again, like I said, you can't translate Sahih. For example, anyone a doctor? Is anyone a doctor here? We don't have any doctors? Any engineers? Engineer, okay. Can you give me an example of a word that's a jargon, that's a terminology, and you can't translate that word? It doesn't mean what it linguistically means.
De-water.
Sorry?
De-water.
Deep water?
Yeah.
What's this a jargon meaning of that?
De-water.
Yeah, dewater.
Can you explain that for us? What that is?
It's dewater. It's an engineering term for in oil and gas. You use for dewatering. If
Okay.
you separate hydrocarbon and you dewater it. It takes
Okay.
some dewater.
Perfect. So now, if we were to linguistically translate that when you're reading a science book, you'd be very confused, correct? It doesn't mean to actually dewater, take water out of something, correct? No, it's a specific term that refers to a specific thing, and only the people who are engineers who study that field will understand what they mean when they say dewater. Same thing with hadith terminology. Sahih cannot be translated and say, oh, Sahih means correct, therefore Sahih hadith are correct hadith, and Da'if hadith means weak hadith, it means weak, so therefore these are weak hadith and we can't take it, it's weak. That's not what Sahih and Da'if means. These are terminologies that the scholars of hadith have coined, so because when they're communicating with each other, they know what they mean when they say Sahih. But now, you can't come to these books and read Sahih and take the literal translation, look up in the dictionary, oh, Sahih means correct, this is what they're saying here. That's not what they're saying at all. You understand? Sahih has 5 conditions that the narrators should be aqil, they should have no intellectual there should be no nuqs, there should be no deficiency in their intellect. Right? They have to be adil, dhabit. Now again, adil, what is adil? Adil means trustworthy. What is trustworthy? There's books and books written on what trustworthy is. That's the dhabit. That means that they have to be veracious. They have to have veracity when narrating. What is dhabit? Again, books and books and books. We can go on, talk 2-3 hours on what adil, dhabit is. Again, these are terminologies. Further defined by terminologies. There should be no nakara in the matan, in the text of that hadith. Nor should there be any illah, that everything seems apparent, but still there's a hidden defect. Now what is illah? Again, this is an entire science on its own. This is what sahih means. Right? It's a very technical term. So if we're talking about sahih and da'if, it's a disservice to understand it as linguistic terminology and assume it to be as such and approach it as such. Right? So this is something very important I want to draw attention to. So now when we say sahih, da'if, number one, this is not a hard and fast black and white rule. One hadith can be classified by a hadith scholar as sahih, and that very same hadith will be classified as hasan or even munkar or even da'if by another scholar. Now, when you say sahih, if you ask me what is this hadith sahih, according to who? Do you want me to tell you based off Imam Bukhari's understanding of what sahih is? Imam Muslim's understanding? Imam Ali's understanding? Who? According to who? This is not a black and white, hard and fast science. It's subjective, right? So now, in Sunan Tirmidhi, his objective, unfortunately, there are people who have taken, for example, Sunan Tirmidhi, and they went through the entire Sunan Tirmidhi and took out whatever is not Sahih and kept only what is Sahih, right? This is a disservice to the book, because in the title itself, Imam Tirmidhi mentions that this is a compilation of a sahih ahadith that I've put, some of them which are true, some of them which are sahih, some of them which are ma'lul, and I have explained how to differentiate between the two. He brought those weak ahadith for a purpose, and he explains that at the end of each chapter. But if you're going to go and remove all the da'if ahadith, you're doing a disservice to Imam Tirmidhi. You're completely ignoring the author's objective of writing a book. You understand? Now, all the ahadith in Shama'il al-Tirmidhi are not sahih, by the technical definition of sahih. But none of them are at a level of nakara that we can't accept them. They are all acceptable, all at a level of authenticity, which is acceptable. You won't really find many people who will criticize a hadith that's found in the Shama'il as being unworthy of being accepted. I hope that answers your question. I don't mean to attack anyone, this is just something very important for us to understand when we're approaching hadith. Okay? Hadith is a science, it's a very nuanced science. Islamic academia is a very nuanced subject. It's not something that we can just pick up, child's play, anyone can pick up a book and start reading. There's a lot of prerequisitory knowledge that you have to be able to even access these things. Right? It's very, very important to understand these things fully before we approach, and especially when we engage in dialogue with each other, it's important to understand these things, right? So that the basic summary takeaway is that basically Sahih and Da'if, these are not to be translated literally. These are not lexical terms. These are not, they're not being used in their dictionary meaning. Sahih, Da'if, Hasan, Munkar, these are all what? Terminologies. They are jargon. And jargon cannot be found in a dictionary. It takes if you're trying to be an engineer, it takes years of study to become familiarize yourself with this jargon, for example, correct? To be able to understand it and use it in
Like
some
computers,
context.
comes up computer languages, some jargons, right?
Exactly, yeah. So every single field has its own jargon. And if you want to understand the scholars of that field, then you have to be familiar with that jargon. Otherwise, you will do yourself a disservice because you'll be more confused after you read that book than before you read that book. Right? You read a science book, an engineering book, and you read de-water, and now you're trying to figure out how to take water out of something, you're just going to be confused. You don't know what to do. Same thing with hadith. Right? Same thing with fiqh. Same thing with any other science. Right? It has a jargon, and in order to understand it properly, you have to go to scholars of that science who can explain it to you. Otherwise, it's not accessible just like that. Just like any other science.
So just by reading, if you don't have clear understanding, you need to go to somebody.
Yeah, فَاسْأَلُوا, Allah SWT says in the Quran, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. This word dhikr is such an amazing word because Allah SWT said, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ. This covers every single aspect of our life. It means if you don't know something, go to the people who know that field. If you have an engineering question, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْر. When we say that Quran has answers to everything, this one ayah has an answer to everything. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْر. Go to people who understand that field, who have answers for that specific question, and you'll find the answers there. If you have a confusion about some fiqh related matter, go to the fuqaha, go to the scholars of fiqh. If you have a question about hadith, go to the scholars of hadith. You have a medical issue, go to doctors, go to people who study medicine. فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْر. Go to people who know if you want, if you don't know something. If you do not know, if you don't know, then what? فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْر. Ask people who know that field, that subject. Does that make sense?
Actually, Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, he quoted in his book, Jami Tirmidhi, some hadith, he quoted, Sahih Gharib.
Yeah.
Gharib. What do you mean, Gharib?
Sahih Gharib, that is a subject that no one has definitive answers for on the Day of Judgment. We'll have to ask Imam Tirmidhi himself, because there's, again, books and books written on this. We have like 12, 13, 14 different opinions on what Sahih and Gharib, Hasan and Sahih means. Because only Imam Tirmidhi uses these terminologies in conjunction with each other. So what that exactly means, no one can say for sure.
No.
You said about the hadith that it is about Prophet ﷺ, right? Anybody narrating it, even though it's not coming from Prophet ﷺ. So what is? I mean, it's the first time I'm hearing about this. I thought that hadith is anything with Prophet ﷺ. So can you elaborate on this?
Yeah. So hadith, again, hadith. There's so many terminologies. Hadith, after all these different terminologies that exist. And when specifically they're about different things, but generally in practice they're all used interchangeably. Hadith is anything that Rasulullah ﷺ did, said, or acknowledged. Basically, he saw it, he witnessed it, and he didn't say anything about it. He remained silent, because the silence of Rasulullah ﷺ when witnessing something means it's okay, because it's not possible for a Nabi to see something wrong and not object to it. Okay? So if Rasulullah is seeing something and he's not objecting, that means that's okay. Okay? So all of these things fall under hadith. Now, something that Rasulullah said will obviously be the words of Rasulullah. Now, if something that Rasulullah did, they'll not be the words of Rasulullah. There's no words there. It's an action that the Sahaba witnessed, observed, and they narrated it. But they still fall within the umbrella of hadith. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then now this Shumail, right? This the quality, appearance and all of that. That is somebody else is narrating about Prophet ﷺ.
It depends. For example, there will be quotation where Rasulullah himself mentioned something, but a lot of it will be the description of Rasulullah from others. So, for example, we just read a narration describing Rasulullah. Obviously, Rasulullah didn't say that about himself; he just existed. And this is Ali radiallahu anhu seeing Rasulullah describing it to his children. Right? So these are the words of Ali radiallahu anhu. Right?
Sheikh, can you next time maybe can you explain what is the conditions of the Daif Hadith now? We know the condition of the Shaykh Hadith now.
Yeah.
So what is the condition of Daif Hadith? Maybe you can explain next time.
And we can go into it briefly, but again, it's a very, very nuanced science that you can't just explain like that.
Because we can't literally take it as any Hadith. For
Yeah, we
example,
can.
we say Saban 15 Shaban, people are doing a different way.
Yeah.
Okay? Layl Jaija. So this all comes under the Daif Hadith and people are doing it. So we want to know what is Daif, conditions of Daif, how we need to follow it when we have a lot of Sahih hadiths to follow it.
Why we can take hadith? Where can we follow Da'if hadith? Sorry, can you repeat the last part of the question?
When for our deen, to follow deen, we have a lot of Sahih hadiths to follow deen. What is the requirement for to follow Daif hadith? When Sahih hadith has everything. Allah has completed the religion, right? So what is the reason behind to follow Daif hadith? So maybe next, no, I don't want to explain.
Yeah.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, inshallah.
It's a big topic, so
Definitely.
yeah, so don't,
We can get into that next time, inshallah. Any other questions? No, that's it. Okay, we'll conclude that, inshallah. We'll continue next week. Subhanallah, bihamdi, subhanakallah, wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Jazakallah.
We have some snacks in the banquet hall. Please help yourself.